Hello, good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Let us know in the chat from where you're tuning in today. My name is Andres Santi from the ANOC office, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this second ANOC social media workshop. The first workshop was held back in June, just before the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, and it started our ANOC Digital Accelerator program. Just to tell you a bit more about the program, ANOC created it to equip you, our member NOCs, with the tools to increase digital engagement with people, which is one of IOC's recommendation on Agenda 2020+5. Further, it intends to promote their interaction and exchange between the NOCs and share the best practices in order to grow together. So far, we have made available to you the social media handbook, the social media dashboard, as well as one workshop and 2 webinars. For all of you that missed one of the workshops or webinars, they are publicly available on our ANOC YouTube channel, which I encourage you to subscribe. For the next year, we have taken in some of your input from the past webinars, and we hope to introduce to you some new topics very soon. But I also want to remind you that we always have an open ear, so suggestions are welcome anytime in order to enhance our ANOC Digital Accelerator program. We certainly have an exciting 2.5 hours ahead of us, but before I introduce our host and speakers, I would like to go through some housekeeping rules. So I invite everybody and encourage to mute yourself and just turn your microphones on when you are given the floor. Should you have any question at any point or you experience some technical difficulties, please write us in the chat and we will try to solve them as quickly as possible. I also want to remind you that we have interpretation services available for you in English, French, and Spanish. Why do I mention English as well? Is because one of our speakers will be presenting in Spanish today. So if you want to hear the translation in English, go on the word icon at the taskbar there and choose your preferred language. As I said, we have an excellent agenda ahead of us, and we will start reviewing the lessons learned from the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games from a social media perspective. And Retorch will review the NOC social media figures and your fantastic performance during the games. We will then learn from Tere Miganda, Director of Communications of the Puerto Rican NOC, and Corral La Torre, the Social Media Manager, on how they managed to place Puerto Rico on the top 10 NOCs with the most video views during the games. And here, how they dealt with working on a different time zone, which can be quite challenging sometimes. We will then invite Nick Shaw and Gabby Vidal Castillo from Facebook, recently rebranded to Meta, to speak about the principles of successful branded content that will enable opportunities for monetization. Katie William, the Director of Strategic Accounts of the company Greenfly, will then talk about the mutual benefits of creating a partnership with your athletes, as these will become your most valuable influencers. Michelle Chai from the Olympic Council of Malaysia will share with us on how they were able to grow by 488% in Facebook and 869% in Instagram during the games by simply shifting the publishing of corporate NOC news to sharing the athletes' emotions and reactions. And of course, we will also take a look to what is coming up next to us, which is for some NOCs, the Beijing 2020 Olympic Games, for which we have invited a truly China expert, which is Guy Horn from H&A Media. So now I have the pleasure to introduce you to Matthew Weiner, Creative Director of our partner company, Retorch, who will be our host today. Matthew has more than 15 years of experience in the industry, and his extensive portfolio includes brands like Adidas and the English Premier League. Matt was also one of our speakers in the last workshop, who, off the records, our interpreters loved for his slow-paced and sweet-voiced presentations. So with less further ado, welcome, Matt. How are you?
I think that might be the nicest introduction I've ever had. Thank you so much, Andres. Hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be back here with you today at the ANOC workshop. It is, I've already been introduced, so I don't think I need to introduce myself any further. Red Torch, I'm the creative director at Red Torch. We are an award-winning research, digital and social media agency trusted by some of the biggest brands in sport to grow and activate global audiences. We're absolutely delighted to be partner with ANOC for this workshop. And as has already been mentioned by Andres, if you do have any questions for any of the speakers, please put them in the chat and then we will read them out as time permits. And of course, please keep your mics on mute, unless you're a speaker, of course. So without further ado, we'd like to kick off with part one, our review of Tokyo. So what did happen at Tokyo 2020 on social media? Well, we have Tom Lloyd Evans, who is a digital insight analyst at Red Torch, who is going to tell us exactly what happened. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I will share my screen. I hope everyone can see that. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. Great. So hello, everyone. My name is Tom, and I'm a digital insight analyst at Red Torch. I actually joined Red Torch a short while before the Olympics, and I've been heavily involved in looking at how NOCs and international federations have performed at the Olympics. I'm also responsible for updating the ANOC dashboard, which I'm sure some of you will use, where you can look to see how your NOC compares to others in terms of social performance. I'm going to talk a little bit today about just an overview of how NOCs performed at Tokyo 2020, some key trends across social media during the Games, and also a bit about how you can prepare yourself for Beijing 2022. Now, of course, one of the biggest things at Tokyo 2020 was NOCs not having access to live video from the Games. So I'll speak a little bit at the end about some ways to combat not having that live video footage and some content ideas that can be produced without it. So after the Games, we at Red Torch produced a report for ANOC with the aim of seeing just how NOCs performed on social media throughout the Games. We looked at 4 different platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And we also looked at a number of different metrics on each of those platforms. The monitoring period that we used was the 16th of July to the 15th of August. And we then broke these dates down into pre-games, during the Games, and post-games. And what this did was allow us to see the differences in types of content produced and how they then performed at all stages of the Games. And also within the report, we also had a breakdown by continental association, as well as a breakdown by how many Olympians were representing each NOC at the Games. So one of the main metrics that we looked at was, of course, growth. NOCs in total generated 4.9 million new fans, taking the total from 29.5 million to 34.4 million. And the average growth per NOC was 2,300. Now, this is the average for all NOCs, and it does vary among different continents. So some continents will have a higher or lower average than this. Instagram had the most growth of all platforms with 2.7 million, and that was followed by Facebook with 1.2 million. Instagram also experienced the highest growth rates of all platforms by quite a margin, and that was 65.4%. And while Facebook had the lowest growth rate with 6.7%, Facebook did represent 56% of total fans, which is 19 million. And just to put that into perspective, the next highest was Twitter with 7.6 million. Now, in terms of where the growth came from, when it came from, I'm sure it's no surprise that most of it came from during the games. That was 91% of the total growth. 8% came from pre-games and 1% came post-games. Now, despite having the most growth of all platforms and the highest growth rate, Instagram actually saw an 11,000 loss in followers in the week following the games, which it just emphasizes the need to keep posting content after the games. You need to keep fans interested and engaged. So in a minute, I'll speak about some ways that you can do that with examples of content that some NOCs produced after the games. So 85,000 posts were made by NOCs over the Olympic period. 57% of content was posted on Twitter, which is what we'd expect. Twitter is fairly low effort to make posts, and it's often the first place that fans will go to for results or latest updates. YouTube's posts were considerably lower than average. This was a direct result of the lack of live video content available. Without this live video content to post, there was a lot more time and effort required in NOCs creating those YouTube videos. And looking at the posts by period, 80% of the content was posted during the games, 17% was posted pre-games, and 3% was post-games. Of course, during the games, it's a lot easier to make posts about what's happening at the game. So there's lots of different things to be posting about. But generally speaking, the best performing posts were about medalists or records. But primarily, it's just about using every opportunity to post updates whilst things are happening to keep fans engaged. Some examples of content that was posted pre-games is athletes traveling to Tokyo. So there were a lot of pictures of athletes at the airport or when they arrived in Japan. There were posts about the Olympic Village and athletes exploring this area. There were also graphics to count down until the games begin. And then finally, there were some throwback videos to previous competitions and previous Olympic Games. There were 5 times as many posts made pre-games than there were post-games. So it may have been a little bit harder to produce content post-games, but some examples that you could incorporate into your strategy were then versus now posts. So this was typically used for medal winners, so showing where they were 5 years ago to them currently winning the medal. Olympic roundups, so a graphic or a short video just to summarize how your country performed at the games, and also posts of athletes returning home after the games, so either to a crowd of fans or returning home to their families or just simply getting off the plane. And now, of course, the aim with all of these posts is to get those engagements and get those video views. So from 85,000 posts, NOCs generated 162.7 million engagements and 178.5 million video views. There were 15,000 posts on Instagram, which generated the most engagements of all platforms That was 93.6 million. And Instagram also accounted for 29% of the total video views. And that was 51.8 million, which was the second highest, second to only Facebook. And speaking of Facebook, Facebook had the most video views with 115.5 million. This was 65% of all video views across all platforms. And Facebook also had 28%.
Sorry. Accidentally, you were muted, so if you can unmute yourself, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. So yeah, as I was saying, in terms of engagements and video views, Instagram and Facebook were the real standout performers. So 93% of engagements came from during the games, which totaled to 144 million. And this is what we would expect. This was when most of the content gets posted and also when fans are at the peak of their interest. The best performing posts were, like I said before, generally whenever there was a medal win or a new record. But one thing that we found interesting when doing the report was that even though there was almost 5 times as much content posted pre-games than there was post-games, this post-games period, the week following the closing ceremony, actually had a higher amount of engagements per post than pre-games. And what this shows is that even though the games were over, fans were still interested and engaged with the content that was being produced. Posts, like I mentioned before, the athletes returning home, the Olympic roundups, and the then versus now posts. So it's worth noting that NOCs were able to capitalize on the excitement leading up to the games, but there was also a similar level of interest after the games that can be used to your advantage if you have the content to post. So as mentioned earlier, not having access to live video content from the games is a struggle, and you should have some ideas on what to replace that with. So these are just a few ways that you can combat not having that live video. So first we have pre-prepared video content gathered at other events. So throwback videos to previous Olympics or qualifying events. You can ask yourself, are there any relevant videos from a while ago that you can post in the lead up to an event? Then we have producing athlete interviews at events prior to the games. So essentially just trying to forward plan where possible. If you're with an athlete at any point, try and use that opportunity for an interview that you can post at a later date, perhaps when it's most relevant to increase engagement. And of course, without this live video, you can focus on photos, graphics, and stories. Some of the best performing content at Tokyo 2020 were graphics, and consistency is quite important. If you try to use nicely branded graphics so the user can get all of the information they need as quickly as possible, because recent studies have shown that Gen Z have an attention span of around 8 seconds, which is shorter than millennials, which is around 12 seconds. So if you're trying to attract young fans, you need to make every second count and get that information over as quickly as possible. And then fourth, we have use archive content to build hype around rivalries and upcoming matches. So just create content about specific matches or matchups. If you know that there's been a rivalry or any kind of memorable moment in the past, then this would be a good opportunity for that. And then we have utilizing influencers and user-generated content campaigns. So are there any celebrity fans or famous people that you think will get behind your country at Beijing? Can you work with them to support each other? And then for user-generated content, can you create a campaign that gets fans engaging with you? So for example, pictures of them supporting your country using a certain hashtag that you can decide on. And then finally, we just have tapping into pop culture and memes. Now, the majority of your audience will be domestic, so you will have expert opinion on what is popular or trending in your country. And it can be light-hearted, so popular music or Netflix programs, and just think about how you can incorporate that into your content. So I hope that gave you a little bit of an insight as to what happened on social media at Tokyo 2020, and also gave you some ideas on what you can be posting for Beijing 2022, despite that lack of live video. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tom. That was fantastic, very interesting. Next, we have a Tokyo 2020 case study from the NOC in Puerto Rico. We have two speakers, Terry Miranda, who is Director of Communications of the Communications Department of Puerto Rico Olympic Committee, and Coral Latour, who is Social Media Manager of the Puerto Rico Olympic Committee. Please excuse any of my pronunciations of anyone's name. I am English, and therefore my linguistic abilities are absolutely awful. Apologies. Over to you guys. You are on mute, Terry and Cora.
Yes. Gracias por la oportunidad. I try to share. Okay. Gracias por la oportunidad de estar aquí. Vamos a presentar nuestro trabajo y cómo nosotros pudimos lograr un trabajo que entendemos que es extraordinario para los Juegos Olímpicos de Tokio, lo cual marca para nosotros un precedente muy, muy importante. Previo a esto, quiero hablar un poco rápidamente, unos breves minutos sobre lo que es nuestra historia y cómo nosotros evolucionamos desde el inicio hasta el día del 2021. Muy rápidamente, en el 2009 nosotros dimos inicio con Twitter, en el 2011 Facebook, y en el 2012 Instagram, incorporamos Instagram. En Veracruz, que nosotros en nuestra región tenemos los Juegos Centroamericanos y del Caribe, tenemos Panamericanos y vamos a Olimpiadas. En Veracruz, que fue en el 2014, ya nosotros estábamos tirando las primeras estrategias de lo que eran las redes sociales para nosotros. Independientemente que las habíamos comenzado desde el 2009-2010, que empezamos a hacer un poco de revolución, pero también estábamos estructurando la casa. Ya para el 2015 ya estábamos un poquito más sólidos en relación a lo que era un poco más de las redes sociales. Habíamos desarrollado la marca Copur y el estilo de redes sociales. En ese periodo del 2015 al 2017 fue que realmente solidificamos nuestro trabajo. Esta etapa fue para organizar, para realmente estructurar lo que estábamos haciendo a nivel de redes sociales. Previo a esto, les comento que en Puerto Rico, el Comité Olímpico de Puerto Rico tiene a su vez también los derechos y controla también los derechos de televisión para todos los eventos que les comenté, tanto centroamericanos y del Caribe, panamericanos y olimpiadas en este caso también. Nosotros trabajamos también la producción de televisión en uno de los principales canales del país. Dicho esto, quiere decir que nuestro trabajo de promoción y de producción la basamos tanto en televisión como en redes sociales. Nuestro norte es hacer y producir contenido. Ya en Barranquilla empezamos en el 2018, comenzamos con un poco de experimento en relación a lo que son lo que es Copur Digital. Hicimos nuestros pininos, el inicio de lo que íbamos a trabajar y enfocarnos ya dándole mucho énfasis a lo que eran las redes sociales. Lima, 2019, fue nuestra gran prueba de fuego. Realmente ahí iniciamos lo que es el proyecto que se llama Copur Digital. Copur es Comité Olímpico de Puerto Rico. Copur Digital, para comenzar una nueva era en lo que eran las redes sociales, enfocados única y exclusivamente en las redes sociales y, por otro lado, enfocados también en lo que es la producción de televisión y otros medios, entiéndase prensa, también nunca hemos dejado de tener la prensa, obviamente, pero nos hemos enfocado más a partir del 2019 en lo que es Copur Digital. Y vamos haciendo un building up poco a poco porque ya tenemos grandes metas para poderlas trabajar, ¿no? Para poderlas llegar. 2020, 2021, / 2020, Tokio 2020-2021, los Juegos Olímpicos para nosotros fueron el reto más grande a nivel de la masificación de lo que teníamos que hacer a nivel de redes sociales. Masificamos nuestras redes sociales tanto en volumen como en contenido. Puntos claves para nuestra evolución, muy rápidamente. ¿Cómo evolucionamos? Aquí está. Estrategia y enfoque. Estos fueron nuestros puntos claves para crear la marca Copur. Conexión, producción y oportunidad. Las detallo rápidamente para poderlas explicar. En conexión, nosotros creamos una conexión con el público y la presidenta del Comité Olímpico, que su nombre es Sara Rosario Vélez, ella es nuestra presidenta, y teníamos que crear conexión rápidamente y desde la base con la presidenta y nuestros atletas. Dos protagonistas de la historia, en todo momento unidos de la mano. ¿Por qué teníamos que crear conexión? Porque el pueblo, nuestro pueblo, es un pueblo deportista, pero no todo el total del país es completamente deportista, y de esta forma tuvimos que crear una conexión desde el 2013 con el país, entiéndase, con toda la audiencia. Nosotros a la misma vez tuvimos que ratificar nuestro compromiso con los fans del deporte, con los fanáticos del deporte, y establecimos cómo crear estrategias para tener contacto con el pueblo que no es deportista. Nos interesaba mucho llegar al pueblo no deportista porque ya los fans del deporte los teníamos nuestros, ya eran nuestros, ya son nuestros y nos pertenecen. Pero el pueblo no deportista, a eso era que teníamos que llegar. Y establecimos desde el inicio, desde que entramos en el Comité Olímpico, iniciamos trabajar la confianza con la prensa. ¿Por qué? Porque la prensa es nuestro espejo y nos levantan de parte de ello. En la producción, nos enfocamos en la diversificación de contenido. En el énfasis de contenido gráfico, nosotros estamos en todo momento en énfasis de contenido gráfico y en el desarrollo de contenido en video. Todo el tiempo estamos produciendo, desarrollando contenido para todo el tipo de audiencia, por eso es la diversificación de contenido. Campañas comunitarias y educativas, es importante que nosotros utilizamos nuestras redes para crear campañas comunitarias y educativas. De esta forma hacemos un engage directamente con el país. Y creamos durante la pandemia nos dio la oportunidad de crear programación virtual. Empezando con Conexión PUR, se desarrollaron varios programas durante la pandemia. Todos los días estuvimos en la pandemia desarrollando programas virtuales y estando en el aire con programas virtuales para no perder la audiencia, no perder el interés del público, mantener a todas las personas que estaban en sus casas con un poco de información del Comité Olímpico y realmente tuvimos que delinear estrategias muy importantes. No perdimos en ningún momento oportunidad para retar la imaginación. Nuestro norte era siempre tener contenido. Maximizamos los conceptos en medios de redes. Creamos creación y promoción de eventos nacionales e internacionales. A todos les sacamos por oportunidad, a todos les sacamos provecho para nosotros poder tener información de cómo llegar a nuestra audiencia. Consideramos propuestas e ideas de los auspiciadores que son muy importantes para nosotros y solidificamos la identidad cultural y el sentido de país. Nunca perdemos oportunidad, siempre aprovechamos todas las oportunidades para cómo llegar. Antes de aterrizar a Tokio, ahora vamos a Tokio, ¿qué hicimos? Nuestra preparación mental y física del equipo de comunicación. Entendíamos y estábamos muy claros que eran 13 horas de diferencia entre Tokio y Puerto Rico. 13 horas adelantados Tokio y nosotros estábamos 13 horas atrás. Por tal razón, desde un año antes empezamos como prepararnos mental y físicamente porque sabíamos que íbamos a estar aproximadamente 17 días sin dormir, que son lo que duran los juegos. Sin embargo, previo a esto teníamos que hacer una preparación de que también íbamos a estar sin dormir por lo menos una semana antes para ir acondicionando por lo menos el cuerpo, de que teníamos que hacer un cambio físico para poder estar en el aire durante todos los juegos. A la misma vez, comenzamos una campaña a través de nuestras redes sociales y sobre todo a través de la televisión, y cuando hacíamos medios, toda la prensa y a todas las oportunidades que teníamos aprovechábamos y decíamos que los Juegos Tokio 2020, las Olimpiadas Tokio 2020 eran de noche. Tenía el país que levantarse de noche, seguirnos de noche y a la misma vez continuar su trabajo y su vida diaria durante el día. Lo enfocamos en todo momento. Le dimos mucho énfasis a los manuales de trabajo del comité organizador de Tokio. En otras palabras, ustedes saben que lo que les voy a decir es real, pero Tokio y el comité organizador no dejó de enviar los playbooks en todo momento. Y era importante para todo el equipo de trabajo que iba a viajar a Tokio, pero que también nos quedábamos en Tokio, leer los playbooks, sea de prensa, sea de broadcast, sea de los atletas, de los entrenadores. Todos los playbooks teníamos que leerlos porque sabíamos que estaban escritos en estos playbooks las limitaciones que íbamos a tener. Y número 3, creamos un riguroso plan de trabajo en papel, en planificación. Creamos un riguroso plan de trabajo. ¿Por qué no los exigimos así? Porque no sabíamos lo que íbamos a encontrarnos en Tokio. Si realmente los playbooks se iban a cumplir tal como lo estaba explicando el comité organizador, sabíamos que teníamos limitaciones grandes para ejecutar el trabajo a nivel de redes sociales, a nivel de televisión, que fue muy difícil, y a través de la prensa, que estábamos llevando prensa también allá. ¿En qué nos enfocamos? Programación digital. Nosotros hicimos cobertura de todos los eventos previos a lo que se dio en Tokio. Creamos también lo que les comenté, la programación digital y todo lo que hicimos durante la pandemia previo. Vamos arriba, mi gente, es un podcast que se logró y se realizó para la presidenta. Conexión por los atletas live, estrategas del deporte. Creación de la guía olímpica de Puerto Rico, que siempre creamos una guía para los Juegos, para presentar perfiles de atletas, trasfondo histórico deportivo, calendario de competencia. Todo esto que yo estoy hablando, todo esto es redes sociales, todo. El conteo regresivo a Tokio, donde el uso de gráficos con imágenes, se utilizan las gráficas de las fotos y las gráficas con nuestros atletas, donde se les da información sobre imágenes y a nuestra audiencia de quiénes son nuestros atletas que nos estarán representando, qué representan hacemos videos hechos por los atletas. En esta campaña nosotros nos dedicamos a hacer muchos videos con nuestros atletas. Número uno, los atletas estaban, gran parte de ellos en Puerto Rico durante la pandemia, muy pocos en el exterior. Cuando se da la pandemia, en el 2020, hay muchos, la mitad de nuestros atletas estaban de viaje, los pudimos traer a Puerto Rico y crear un sistema de entrenamiento. En esos entrenamientos que hacían locales, en cada uno de sus lugares, nosotros tratábamos de sacarle video, tratábamos de maximizar en todo dar, de maximizar todo lo que ellos estaban haciendo para tener contenido única y exclusivamente para nuestras redes. De esa forma pudimos hacer un engagement, o sea, un compromiso, un enlace del país con lo que estaban haciendo nuestros atletas en el Comité Olímpico. Eso era nuestro building up o nuestra planificación para llegar a los Juegos Olímpicos de Tokio. Y la cobertura de entrenamientos individuales, tal como acabo de decir, y previo a Tokio, una semana, como 3 semanas antes de Tokio, se hizo un campamento de entrenamiento para aclimatar a los atletas en Finlandia. Originalmente, previo a la pandemia, nosotros teníamos un campamento que íbamos a estar en el país sede, en Japón, para aclimatar el cuerpo de los atletas y al aclimatar no tan solo el cuerpo de los atletas y el sistema mental y todo su trabajo, sino también de todas las personas que íbamos a trabajar allá. Sin embargo, una vez comenzó la pandemia, Japón cerró muchos de estos entrenamientos, lugares de entrenamiento, y el lugar más cercano a Japón que pudimos conseguir fue en Finlandia. Habían 6 horas de diferencia solamente entre Finlandia y Tokio, pero por lo menos era la mitad. De esa forma, nuestros atletas se pudieron aclimatar, pero el equipo de trabajo que iba con ellos también. Era importante aclimatar el equipo de trabajo, por lo menos mentalmente, ¿no? Para poder ejecutar un gran trabajo, un buen trabajo en Tokio. Llegamos a Tokio, Puerto Rico en Tokio. ¿Qué pasó allí? Lo siguiente, las claves del éxito en las redes sociales para nosotros fue la planificación y agenda de contenido diaria, como siempre lo hacemos, pero en esta ocasión tenía que ser más riguroso todavía. Teníamos que planificarnos directamente de cómo íbamos a trabajar nuestro contenido y qué nos íbamos a encontrar. Una realidad fue lo que nos imaginábamos en Puerto Rico de lo que iba a pasar en Tokio, y otra fue cuando llegamos a Tokio y nos dimos cuenta que realmente los playbooks estaban llevándose a cabo, estaba toda una limitación en relación al COVID, para nuestra salida, para nuestro performance que íbamos nuestro trabajo que íbamos a hacer en la calle, sobre todo con los atletas, la no accesibilidad a las zonas de zona internacional o al mix zone o áreas que realmente nosotros estábamos acostumbrados a llegar mucho más rápido. El mix zone ahora era un poco más limitado y realmente pudimos trabajar con toda esa planificación para poder lograr nuestro trabajo. Parte de nuestro trabajo es la uniformidad en todas las redes, entiéndase en Facebook, Twitter, Instagram y YouTube. La calidad de imagen y video, nosotros creemos mucho en eso. Tenemos un gran equipo de trabajo que realmente es importantísimo en la calidad y el video. Trabajan muy bien esto. Los colores y las marcas muy definidas. Estamos claros de que todos en nuestro equipo de trabajo, todos tenemos inmediatez, tenemos que estar haciendo actualidad, updates y tener continuidad en todo el trabajo que hacemos. Es importante la inmediatez. Todo nuestro equipo tiene inmediatez. En nuestro equipo de trabajo somos 4 personas, 4 en el departamento de comunicaciones, más 2, entiéndase, la presidenta del Comité Olímpico y la directora de mercadeo, que están siempre muy pendientes y muy inmersas en el trabajo que hacemos, pero la ejecución de todo esto solamente somos 4 y lo tenemos muy bien definido cada uno de los roles, ¿no? La educación y diversidad es importante que se tenga para poder mantener al público completamente a tono con todo lo que nosotros trabajamos. Y aparte de todo eso, ¿cómo planificamos nuestra agenda? Yo voy a definir los puntos muy rápidamente. Puro trabajo en equipo. Nosotros somos un gran teamwork, de verdad que lo somos. Tenemos un gran equipo de trabajo donde cada rol está muy bien dividido. Compromiso con la institución, todos tenemos un gran compromiso con lo que es olimpismo y con nuestro trabajo. La integración de roles, una vez nosotros salimos al field, como ustedes pueden apreciar en las fotos, una vez salimos al field, todo el mundo está muy claro de cuál es su rol de trabajo, pero también nos ayudamos unos a otros. Tenemos comunicación 24 horas al día, los 7 días a la semana. Esto no tan solo fue en Tokio, esto también es previo a Tokio y post Tokio. Siempre nosotros tenemos comunicación diaria. Obviamente somos creativos, no, reconozco que el equipo de trabajo es muy creativo y en todo momento tenemos sentido de urgencia. El sentido de urgencia nos ayuda mucho porque todo tiene que estar arriba inmediatamente. Tenemos un patrón de diseño, obviamente que continúa y impera en todas nuestras redes. Tenemos un contenido uniforme y consistente, o sea, lo que nos proponemos lo ponemos de una forma uniforme y consistente. Tenemos una defensa y exposición de nuestra marca muy, muy férrea, o sea, defendemos la marca Copur en todos los niveles. Producción y edición de alta calidad, tenemos un equipo de trabajo que obviamente en edición y producción que realmente es nuestro caballito de pelea. Prontitud y atención constante a todo lo que sucede. Estamos en todo momento muy atentas a todo lo que sucede a nuestro alrededor, sacándole y maximizando todos los posibles eventos que, aunque no estén planificados, la podamos crear inmediatamente y sacarle provecho. Tenemos en la educación y diversidad tenemos creación y legado, cronología y archivo histórico, mensaje de unidad y positivismo y la difusión de acontecimientos de historia. Todo esto que estoy hablando, esta es la guía y es la antorcha olímpica, es pura redes sociales. Tenemos que mantener también esto porque el pueblo tiene que saber qué hacen sus atletas, de dónde salieron, cómo son y cuál es su performance histórico. Esto es una muestra de más o menos de lo que se presenta a través de todas las redes sociales, por eso es que no pongo que es Facebook, que no las defino todas. Esto mismo sale en todas las redes sociales. Desde le sacamos al medallero, le sacamos provecho a los performances de nuestros atletas, nuestra medalla olímpica, Yasmín Camacho Quinn, que ya, o Coral, que nuestra manejadora de redes sociales les va a estar hablando, nuestra medallista olímpica, ella es la que realmente nos despuntó en esta ocasión. En el 2016 fue Mónica Puy con nuestra primera medalla de oro, y en el 2020 con Tokio, en nuestra Yasmín Camacho Quinn, que realmente nos ayudó a poder difundir y que nuestras redes explotaran mucho más. Se convirtió en una querendona no tan solo del país, sino del mundo. Le sacamos a las presentaciones de nuestros atletas, las maximizamos cuando se despiden del escenario olímpico, igualmente a nuestros fans, a nuestros abanderados, a los calendarios, desde que cumplen, desde los cumpleaños, o sea, maximizamos todo, y esto en Tokio es una muestra de todo lo que sucedió allá. El crecimiento de nuestras redes sociales durante Tokio fue vertiginoso. Trabajamos con contenido y distribución 100% orgánico. Nuestros videos se convirtieron virales. Nuestros atletas fueron claves, con atletas claves. Los videos virales fueron con atletas claves, no tan solo con Yasmín Camacho Quinn. Tenemos a una Adriana Díaz, que es la número 1 a nivel de América en tenis de mesa. Y obviamente es la número 13 en este momento a nivel mundial. El skateboard, la incorporación del deporte del skateboard en las Olimpiadas Tokio 2020 a nosotros nos dio un boom en Puerto Rico, porque aquí se practica muy bien el skateboard y nos dio un boom en la juventud. Le agregó juventud a nuestras redes sociales y eso nos ayudó a incrementarlas. Y el respaldo de la televisión en la promoción de lo que estábamos haciendo. Todo lo que salía por televisión no se repercutía en televisión, en las redes sociales, perdón. Sin embargo, todo lo que nosotros hacíamos, lo promocionábamos de que por favor el público entrara a las redes sociales para que pudiesen conocer más información de nuestros atletas behind the scenes, para que esta información no se repetía. Lo que salía por televisión era único y lo que salía por redes sociales era único también. Sin embargo, hacíamos un cross promotion de las dos áreas para poder maximizar y crecer las redes durante Tokio y durante lo que estábamos haciendo. Importante, antes de pasar a Coral, que les va a explicar ahora mismo la parte de las estadísticas, importante. El pueblo de Puerto Rico no durmió durante los juegos, no se acostaron ni tan siquiera para la televisión, que estuvimos en transmisión desde las 7 de la noche, hora de Puerto Rico, hasta las 9, 10 de la mañana, tuvimos 12 horas en total, perdón, tuvimos 12 horas de 7 a 9 en el aire, transmitiendo, esto era 12 horas de contenido puro. Igualmente en las redes sociales tuvimos las 24 horas en todo momento subiendo información y trabajando con todo lo que nos llegaba de allá. ¿Qué fue a Tokio? ¿A quiénes enviamos a Tokio? Enviamos un crew que se dividió en dos personas, en dos grupos de trabajo, que en ese grupo de trabajo le dimos muchísimo énfasis a lo que era la exposición de nuestros atletas, la exposición de nuestra presidenta y la exposición de todo lo que podíamos trabajar de alguna forma en behind the scenes de nuestra delegación en Tokio. Le voy a pasar ahora con Coral, que es nuestra gerente de redes sociales, para que ella les explique un poco sobre nuestro crecimiento en los números en Tokio.
Saludos a todos, ¿me oyen bien? Creo que sí. Mi nombre es Carla Torres, soy la manejadora de las redes sociales. Como bien Tere explicó previamente, el trabajo que se realizó en Tokio, ella y yo nos encontramos en Puerto Rico conectadas con la producción de televisión y a su vez yo me encontraba manejando todo el contenido que se estaba poniendo en las redes. En números, nuestra red social de mayor impacto fue Facebook, por la cantidad de seguidores que tenemos. Los videos fueron clave en el crecimiento total de nuestra página, que fue 100% orgánica. Es algo en lo que nos hemos enfocado mucho, en que sea un desarrollo orgánico del contenido. La mayoría de la gente estaba conectada a los videos. Tuvimos 3.3 millones de minutos visualizados, que es un gran número, considerando que hay múltiples plataformas sociales corriendo a la misma vez. Y tuvimos un alcance sorprendente para nosotros, porque fue de 3.2 millones de personas y déjame buscar la palabra correcta, y una interacción, porque si lo digo en inglés pues es confuso, el engagement, la interacción de las personas superó el alcance de 3.3 millones de personas, considerando que la población de Puerto Rico es de 3.2, 3.3 millones locales en la isla, y se mantuvieron en todo momento compartiendo, comentando y dando like al contenido, no solamente de fotos, de videos, y se mantuvieron siguiendo sin importar el cambio de hora, sin importar la hora en que saliera la información, en consecuencia a que los juegos eran 13 horas de diferencia. Próximo slide, por favor. Aquí pueden ver el impacto que los juegos tuvieron en nuestros seguidores. Para la misma fecha, un año anterior, el crecimiento fue sustancial. Facebook es nuestra red principal en una generación pues, más adulta en Puerto Rico, y se ha mantenido como nuestra principal manera de conectarnos. El engagement tuvo un crecimiento de 1025% en solamente 17 días de juego. Obviamente desde antes se estuvo desarrollando una campaña que ayudó a ese incremento durante el mes de julio y luego durante el mes de agosto con el recibimiento de nuestra medallista, lo que nos ayudó a mantener el número lo suficientemente alto para lograr estos números finales. En cuestión a los seguidores, debo decir que hubo un incremento en la juventud, como mencionó Tere, con la implementación del skateboarding en la delegación y en los juegos. Hubo un gran número de jóvenes que se conectaron a nuestras redes para seguir lo que fue el skateboarding, lo que fue el tenis de mesa y lo que fue el logro de Yasmín Camacho Quinn cuando ganó. Principalmente, como dijeron en la primera presentación, los videos fueron clave en Facebook. Y en el próximo slide vamos a poder hablar de lo que fue Instagram. Fue nuestra red principal en cuestión de la velocidad con la que podemos subir el contenido, ya que los atletas son 100% clave en lo que es el Instagram. Facebook es la gente y la interacción, pero el Instagram, nuestros atletas dominan el Instagram y son la base de ese desarrollo. Tuvimos un gran alcance con cerca de 1 millón de interacciones. Aquí el número que nos muestra la fecha. Instagram tiene una pequeña limitación en fecha, el número sí superó el 1 millón de interacciones. Lo que pasa es que la estadística pues es un poco limitada en cómo Instagram lo muestra. Superamos el 1 millón de interacciones y tuvimos más de 22 millones de impresiones, lo que es un logro increíble en una red que al menos cuando comenzamos los juegos teníamos cerca de 88,000 seguidores y al final de los juegos teníamos 105,000 seguidores. Ya al día de hoy tenemos más de 106,000. El impacto de los juegos fue grande en ese crecimiento, pero como podrán ver en las gráficas, el contenido de nosotros llega más a personas que no nos siguen que a personas que nos siguen, que es un dato muy curioso, pero sigue siendo importante, porque quiere decir que aunque no tenemos el número de seguidores, estamos atrayendo lo suficiente el engagement y estamos atrayendo interacciones sin que sean nuestros seguidores. O sea, nuestros videos, como podrán ver en la parte de abajo del slide, lo mínimo que están teniendo nuestros videos son 50,000 views. Tenemos videos que superan los 100,000, los 150,000. Hemos logrado éxito con solamente videos. Y la gran mayoría de estos, como dijo Tere, son los atletas claves. Yasmín Camacho Quinn cuando ganó, Yasmín cuando celebró en Puerto Rico su medalla, Adriana Díaz, Steven Piñeiro, nuestro skateboarder, Melissa Mojica, nuestra judoka que se retiró en los Juegos de Tokio. Fueron historias más del lado humano, más allá de lo que es el lado de la competición, de sus reacciones, de sus mensajes al pueblo, lo que nos llevaron a que subiera grandemente nuestro alcance en Instagram. Y nuestros seguidores se han mantenido en constancia subiendo. Siempre se pierden seguidores, como lo van a poder ver, pero ha sido lo mínimo desde que desde que el Comité Olímpico está presente en Instagram. Así que en números, Instagram fue la red de más rápido crecimiento durante Tokio y fue la que nos sostuvo en parte de estar conectado a los atletas. Su contenido personal era lo que utilizábamos y lo compartíamos unido a las gráficas y a los artes que se compartían de ellos. Próximo slide, por favor. Twitter, aunque no fue nuestra red de mayor crecimiento, sí tuvo un gran impacto en la inmediatez en la que compartimos la información. 1.6 millones de impresiones, que es la mayor cantidad de impresiones que hemos tenido en este último ciclo. Y fue en crecimiento. Desde el mes de junio, la campaña que comenzó con los abanderados y los atletas que salían para Tokio, se fue complementando y entre julio y agosto tuvimos el mayor crecimiento de 1.4 millones a 1.6 millones que se mantuvo. O nuevamente eran historias cortas, el uso de hashtags era constante y creamos una marca que es posible desde Tokio, que se está continuando ahora acá en Cali, que se ha sostenido muy bien en nuestros números. En este caso, los atletas claves fueron Rafael Quintero, el clavadista puertorriqueño que llegó en los primeros 7-8 lugares de Tokio. Y siempre, desde que Tokio inició, Yasmin ha sido la bandera total en las redes. El movimiento con sus publicaciones personales y las publicaciones que realizábamos nosotros superaron todos los números. Siempre habían cerca de 50.000 a 60.000 en cuestión de horas, que es un número maravilloso para nosotros. Así que en cuestión de la parte de las redes sociales, en un resumen que podemos hacer es que nos enfocamos en las historias de cómo estos atletas han llegado a donde han llegado, de quiénes son ellos como personas, y hemos maximizado el orgullo del país sobre estos atletas. Ha sido un éxito la uniformidad que hemos tenido, nuestras 3 plataformas, inclusive puedo añadir a YouTube, que aunque no tuvimos el mayor crecimiento numérico, sí nos ayudó a exponerlo. Todas son uniformes, en todas van a tener el contenido, obviamente siempre se edita y se especifica para cada cual. Tratamos de que todas las imágenes se adapten a cada red para que el contenido visualmente sea el mejor. Y al mantener esa uniformidad, las personas que siguen nuestras redes pueden buscar en todas y en todas van a encontrar la información. No hay falta de información una en la otra, que ha sido esencial. Obviamente la calidad del equipo de producción, los videos y las fotos, lo hacen más appealing, lo hacen más atractivo para la gente y es más fácil que se mantengan conectados a nuestras redes constantemente porque saben que van a encontrar calidad de información y de gráficas y videos. Que es como un complemento para el resto de las redes. Creo que la próxima gráfica es tuya, Tere. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Coral. Una de las notas importantes es, Puerto Rico tiene en este momento, entendíamos que tenía 3.2 millones, pero en este momento tiene 2.750.885 habitantes en nuestra isla. Anteriormente, un año atrás, previo a la pandemia y en varios años atrás, desde el 2017 estábamos en 3.5, 3.7. Me explico la emigración que hemos tenido. En el 2017 nosotros tuvimos un huracán, María, que devastó el país por completo. Luego de eso hemos tenido terremotos, luego la pandemia, y esto ha hecho que las personas emigren hacia los Estados Unidos, hacia todas partes del mundo, pero sobre todo la concentración es en Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, si ustedes se pueden mirar, y esto son notas reales, hay 5.83 millones de puertorriqueños distribuidos sobre todo en el área este de los Estados Unidos. Quiere decir que tenemos más de la mitad de nuestro país viviendo fuera del mismo, fuera de nuestra tierra. Nosotros, a través de las redes sociales, honestamente, a través de las redes sociales hemos podido llegar hasta la diáspora, como nosotros como se le dice, para poder llegar y tocar su corazón olímpico. Créanme que recibimos muchísimo feedback, muchísima retroalimentación de parte del país que está fuera de nuestras costas, y realmente nos mantenemos en una comunicación con ellos. Le contestamos su información y lo mantenemos dentro de todos nuestros eventos. Sobre todo en Tokio se dieron cita. Yo puedo decirle que más de 2 millones de personas que están en el exterior se dieron cita en Tokio a través de las redes sociales porque nos hacían llegar su sentir, nos hacían llegar, había respuesta por parte de ellos. Y es importante este dato porque por nuestra geografía y por nuestra posición política, pues obviamente tenemos mucha interacción con lo que es Estados Unidos. El caso Tokio para nosotros es un caso de, como ustedes lo están poniendo, un case study, y realmente nosotros entendimos que habíamos logrado el propósito. En este momento nuestro equipo de trabajo está posicionado en Cali, en los primeros Juegos Panamericanos Junior en Cali, Colombia, y estamos trabajando de la misma forma que trabajamos para Tokio. Por tal razón estamos produciendo video, creando contenido, trabajando todo lo que se puede maximizar de parte de tanto de los atletas como todo lo que realmente conforma el evento y el proyecto. Copur Digital llegó para quedarse. Nosotros comenzamos con todo esto y realmente a partir del 2022 tenemos grandes proyectos dentro del Comité Olímpico.
Perdona que interrumpa, veo que no sé si vamos a ir a las preguntas. Hay una persona que nos preguntó. Le voy a contestar en inglés para poder hacerlo más cómodamente para mí. NOC Sri Lanka asked how many social media personnel went to Tokyo in total. As I said before, it was Tere and me in Puerto Rico. I'm the only manager for social media, but the team over there did the video, photography, and the writing for all of us. So the team that was in Tokyo sent us all the information, and I put it through to social media. So it was just me and Tere as a producer. Hope that answers the question.
Agradecida por la oportunidad.
Thank you so much, Terry and Coral. That was absolutely fascinating. What an incredible achievement you guys have done. And there's so much for us all to learn from that case study. So thank you again for taking the time to speak to us today. Next, we are moving forward. We have a guest speaker from Meta, Facebook, who is going to talk to us today, and that speaker is Gabby Vidal Castillo. So Gabby, please take it from here. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you, Matt, for the welcome. Hi everyone. Let me just share my screen. Cool. Perfect. Awesome. You should be able to see my screen, hopefully. I'll take the silence as a yes. Yeah, so hi everyone. Really excited to be speaking with you all today. My name is Gabby. I work in the sports partnerships team here at Meta. So yeah, it is Meta now, formerly known as Facebook. I work with the leagues and federations across the EMEA region, and this includes the likes of the IOC, FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, and a few others. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to spend the next 20 minutes with you and give you an overview of our platforms, best practices, and share ways how you can maximize success during the upcoming Winter Olympic Games. So in terms of what we'll cover today, there are a few different parts to the agenda. I just want to start off with a brief overview of sports at Meta and what our focus is as a sports partnerships team. And then we'll dive into video on Facebook and Instagram. We're very conscious when we look at video on Facebook and Instagram that this has evolved over the past years, and there are a growing number of surfaces, and it might not be straightforward to understand what approach you should take across the different surfaces. So we'll be diving into that a little bit. Then we'll go into how to build and execute a content strategy. So this is really around leveraging different types of content themes and content formats across our different surfaces to engage with fans. And then finally, we'll go on to shine a light on the different ways that you can drive incremental revenue through ads and branded content. So without further ado, I'll start off with a brief overview of what we focus on as a team. So the sports partnerships team, we focus on developing and executing the 4 key business solutions to best support Meta's top strategic objectives in a way that drives sustainable partner value. We do believe there is an overlap between our objectives and our partners' objectives, and these are centered around the 4 different areas that you can see highlighted here. So audience development, and that's really around reaching with fans and engaging with them in a meaningful way, kind of, you know, following on from the previous presentation and kind of really touching on the importance of getting that right. How do you engage with fans in a meaningful and an effective way through different surfaces? Then also looking at media distribution, and this is really centered around in-stream. And when I say in-stream, I mean in-stream advertising and using some of our ads monetization products to drive revenue, incremental revenue from your content that you're publishing on platform. Also looking at commerce and conversion. So this is really around using our solutions to drive merchandise sales. So whether that's kits, equipment, etc., but also even tickets where relevant. We understand that it might not necessarily be as relevant, but perhaps some those who do have OTT platforms, that's your own and operated platforms, also driving traffic to those channels as well. And last but not least, which we'll also touch on today, it's sponsorship, sales and activation. So this is really around branded content. So this is the work that you would do in partnership with your brands across our platforms. So it's one of our main objectives, and obviously I've talked about video a little bit, but really one of our main objectives as an organization is to drive a sustainable video business. And I think this explains the level of investment and development that we've made across our platform. So whether that's the introduction of new surfaces like Reels, which was launched about just a little over a year ago, or even the enhancements and developments that we've made across monetization products to drive partner value. So we'll now dive into some of the differences across these surfaces. Oh, cool. Bear with me. Cool. So as you can see here, before we get into the surfaces, just wanted to showcase how the audience engagement funnel works. And maybe this is something that you're already applying, but just wanted to touch on this, and because each stage is just as important as each other, and it will ultimately help you as an organization drive goals, whether that's viewership goals, whether that's monetization goals, but it's really around getting that first initial upper funnel piece right. So that's around driving discovery, driving reach. Again, following on from the previous presentation that we heard from the ladies that a lot of their engagement and viewership is not necessarily coming from people that follow them. So it's a question of, again, also being able to tap into those unconnected viewers, those unconnected users that might not necessarily follow you, but will have an affinity towards your content. And then that's driving them right down to the funnel through engagement and meaningful consumption. Again, just to follow on from what was said earlier on around some of that storytelling, right? You mentioned some of the best performing pieces of content was around the stories, the behind the scenes, those beautiful stories that are captivating. And we'll actually get into that in a little bit more detail in the following slides. And then finally, how does that ladder into whether that's driving on-platform value, whether that's branded content or in-stream earnings, which we'll talk about today, or even off-platform value. So there's lots of different surfaces to focus on when it comes to Facebook and Instagram. We have stories across Facebook and Instagram. We also have Reels. Again, new formats, massive priority for us as an organization. It's a new way, a new entertaining way to tap into those fans and also tap into those unconnected audiences that don't necessarily follow you. Also looking at IG video. So you have hopefully seen that we recently launched, there was an update on IG video, and this is relatively new, about a month old, where we essentially have consolidated what IG video looks like on platform. So you don't have IGTV video anymore. You don't have in video feed. You have one single format, which is IG video. So again, this is really a way for us to make the experience a lot simpler for our users, but also for our publishers. And then also looking at Facebook feed, watch, IG Live, and Facebook Live. So we'll now go into a little bit more detail about what each of these services means. So when we look at Facebook and Instagram stories, this is really, a low pressure bingeable format. It's full screen, it's fast, it's a perfect destination for fun, playful, interactive experiences. Also a great way for you to showcase behind the scenes. Can you potentially work with one of the athletes to provide a behind the scenes? Can you tell us the stories? What's unfolding? How do they feel after they've just competed? This is really a quite unique way to speak to fans. There's also Reels, as I mentioned. So this is a new way to create entertaining short videos that last. They can reach new audiences. This is a really important part, as you can tap into unconnected audiences that don't necessarily follow you, and you can be part of cultural trends. So I think on Reels, some of the things that I would encourage you guys to think about is using some of the creative tools. Using audio, trending audio tends to help particularly well to drive distribution of Reels, and really important to bear in mind, as well as, this is a major cultural moment, the Winter Olympic Games. A lot of people, there'll be a lot of eyeballs on this, and there's the perfect way to leverage this is by using some of the tools that are available and using this format. Also looking at IG video and Facebook feed. So this is really the heart of video discovery, and that delivers highly personalized content that can be consumed in different ways throughout the way. So this is more around, we looked at on the go consumption, and this is getting more into the captivated viewing, more of a sit down consumption around the storytelling that we had from the previous examples. Also, you have watch, relatively similar, but it's more of a dedicated video destination for captivated viewing. And then last but not least, we have the live format. So again, this is a different way to connect, but an easy way to interact with your community, whether that's Q&A, again, if you do have access to, not necessarily, obviously we know that the Olympians will be incredibly busy during this period, but whether that's even leveraging some former Olympians that can jump on board and also get involved with the action. I wanted to take you through now ways, more prescriptive ways on how to build and execute the content strategy. So we touched on the different types of surfaces available, but I just wanted to showcase a little bit more about what it means from a thematic perspective, from an objective metric, and even from an uploads perspective at some of the volumes that you could have top of mind. So obviously on the go, this is much around short form consumption and for short form production, looking at stories and reels. And this is really snackable content. In terms of the metrics, it's reach and awareness. So we know they're not necessarily meaningful, they're not long form viewership metrics. They serve a different purpose, and it's very important to bear that in mind. When we look, so that's when we should have reach and impression, place and views top of mind. When we go more into the captivated viewing, we're looking at more meaningful long form metrics such as loyalty and time spent, looking at 1 minute video views and watch time as the metrics for success. In terms of some of the different types of content themes to have top of mind, and again, this will vary depending on the axis, but it's really around when we look on the go consumption is having that authentic insiders view, as I mentioned, and behind the scenes and in the moment updates, interactivity. Obviously, we know that, again, given the current circumstances with COVID, access might be limited, but can you get creative to provide that insider view? And also using some of the tools like quizzes, polls, etc., to engage with fans and drive that engagement. Looking at reels, a new and creative angle, looking at big moments, iconic clips, funny incidents, fan reactions. This is genuinely, when we look at Instagram as a whole and we look at the different surfaces, Reels is the primary source of viewership and engagement nowadays. It is driving a lot of value for partners. So I would really consider would really urge you guys to think about, okay, well, what's my real strategy? What content will live there versus what will live on feed, for instance. And also a few other things to bear in mind when we look at the more captivated viewing, it's looking at IG feed and Facebook feed and watch, and some of the different examples. So whether that's leveraging where relevant, some previous compilations, archive content. Again, just to caveat, this is rights restrictions dependent, and we know that it varies and it can be somewhat limited. But also some of the deeper storytelling that we heard from the previous example, right? It's around telling the beautiful stories about an Olympian, a rising Olympian, and that's coming through, that it's that has a beautiful story to tell, regardless of whatever the outcome is. I think when we think of the games and the Olympic Games, that's really at the heart of the spirit. What can you do to tell some of the stories? And then finally, looking at live formats, again, that's more around host-led, whether it's pre and post match event shows, training, press conferences, etc. Again, this is rights dependent and also access dependent. I just wanted to flag the opportunity around tentpole events and why it's so important for you guys to have a thought out strategy in place. This is from an unnamed tentpole event that took place in 2019, but you can see here how a partner's level of engagement and viewership fluctuates. And again, I feel like I'm referring to the previous presentation quite a lot, but it has done a great job to tee up some of my points. So thank you for that. And you could see it from their own graphs, and you can see from here the impact that it has on your metrics. So it's a question of being ready for that moment. What can I do in the lead up? Can I tease my fans? Is there any content that I can leverage to warm up the fans? So then eventually when it gets to the peak, that peak is significantly higher. So that's it from a audience development perspective. And the reason why we've gone through that is so key to, that is the foundation to Facebook and Instagram. In order to be able to drive incremental revenue, whether that's through branded content or whether that's through in-stream earnings, you really need to get that previous part of the funnel right. So that's why I wanted to spend some time on that. That is fundamental to the success of driving incremental revenue. So I'll now take you through a few different ways on how partners can drive revenue of our platforms, touching on in-stream advertising and also touching on branded content. Perfect. So starting off with the different, I appreciate there's quite a lot on this slide, but starting off on the left-hand side of the different ad formats that are available. You have across video advertising, you have pre-roll, mid-roll, and image ads that can be inserted at any point. When I say any point, there is eligible content to be monetized. So that's 3 minutes plus content, so long form content. That's what we refer to as long form content. And this is generally where our partners drive the most revenue, given that RPMs and CPMs, when I say RPMs, that's revenue per 1,000 impressions, is the highest. You can also monetize short form content. So that's content starting from 30 seconds right up to the 3-minute mark, and live video. Some of these formats are still in testing phases, but again, I would urge you to think, if you are publishing content and you don't have any commercial restrictions, that is an opportunity for you to be able to drive incremental revenue from that content. We know that this can cost from a production perspective, resource perspective, but you're able to drive incremental revenue from this. Worth noting that branded content is not eligible, and also no ads will appear within boosted content. Most importantly, on the right-hand side, you can see here what the revenue share looks like. It's 55% the publisher, 45% to Facebook. If we go on to the next slide, when my slides start to work, there we go. We can see that we've often had some feedback from partners around reluctancy to enable in-stream monetization. They say, well, is it going to impact the performance of my content? And the answer is not really. As you can see here, there is less than 1% difference between content with in-stream ad insertion versus content without. So we have, through AI, we're able to decipher where the best natural pauses are to be able to integrate ads into the content without it affecting the performance of your video. I wanted to highlight this because it's quite important, given that we know that a lot of you have your own commercial partners that you work with, and you can blocklist certain categories and also specific pages to ensure that commercial partners are protected. So again, we work with some highly commercially sensitive partners, as you can imagine, in the world of the leagues and the federations, whether that's a Formula One or even an IOC. These are partners who have commercial partners that they must protect at all costs, and rightly so. And we do have tools in place that allow you to do so. The final section is around branded content and ways you can execute and what it means. So why branded content on Facebook and Instagram? Again, this is slightly different to in-stream advertising. In-stream advertising is direct revenue. Branded content is more around the partnerships that you have with your brand partners. We take obviously no commercial revenue from this. This is based from the contracts that you have in place. But there's worth bearing in mind what the benefit is for you and for your sponsor. So in terms of the benefit for you, it's really around driving indirect incremental revenue. If you have contracts in place, it's a question of, okay, how valuable is my digital content output to that partner? You can drive incremental reach through obviously higher levels of inventory on platform. You can offset content production costs to that commercial partner. There's more flexibility around content, and you can measure the impact of that and be able to report that back to your sponsor. Equally, what the sponsor receives is your reach, audience, and voice, which ties into the next piece around your content, your IP, and brand sentiment alignment. There's a reason why these partners, they're partnering with you. They want to tap into your audiences, and ultimately you know what works best and you know how to tap into those audiences. Again, referring to the previous examples, you know how to tell those beautiful stories. Your brand partners don't, so you have that unique power. Also looking at custom creative and content resources, there's the content flexibility and the measurable impact that I talked about. There are a couple of principles of successful branded content that I will touch on. First of all, it's around telling a story. Is your content engaging with your audience the same level that your audience, that your other content would? This is really important. You must, it's so key that you represent your authentic voice as opposed to letting a brand partner dictate what should go on. Ultimately, again, back to my point, you know what works best on platform, and that needs to shine through so you can engage with fans in a genuine and authentic way. Also looking at ways to design for retentive consumption, where there is short form content, it serves its purpose, whether it's long form content. How can you make that content meaningful, entertaining, and interactive? The last 2 points are around formatting for mobile. So we know that most consumption is on mobile devices. So are you designing for a mobile first audience? bearing that in mind, that it's different to a broadcast style. And then finally, the optimization and measurement piece is really that this is so key to understand how you're performing. And so you can essentially reiterate and work on what you've already published, what is working, and be able to reiterate some of those learnings. The final section here is around how you can execute branded content and how you can maximize the delivery. So I've got a few examples that I'll take you through. First of all, starting with title cards on the left-hand side. So the reason why we're touching on this, it's how do I ensure that when I'm publishing branded content, I'm still driving value for my partner brand in terms of giving them visibility, but also equally making sure that I am not doing something that's detrimental to the performance of the content, i.e. too much repetition of a logo. That can be a put off for fans that will affect the retention of your content. So after 3 seconds, I don't think that the recordings are working, but we'll send these through. But essentially after 3 seconds, you can include title cards that appear, as you can see here on the left-hand side, that animated, it's lightweight presented with clear and direct product messaging. On the middle, there are interstitial cards. Interstitial cards are essentially, what's the best way to describe them? They're essentially cards that will appear at different parts of the video content that are in natural breaks. They run for less than 3 seconds. So you'll see in this piece of branded content, it's PSG with one of their partners, it's Orange, and they will appear throughout the video as a flash. And finally, there's also end cards that are available. So this will happen towards the end of the content. It will close out with a video animation, fade in, double screen lockup for lasting association. The other additional ones, and one of my preferred ones actually, is the persistent watermark. Here we have an example of Liverpool Football Club. You can see on the top right corner how they've integrated the brand standard chartered. So it's non-intrusive and it appears throughout the length of the video, which helps drive that maximum impact. We also have badging. So badging appear across different content themes and also appears as part of the introduction. And then we also have static images. So on the right hand side, you can see here a results fixture that has the brought to you by partner brand at the bottom. So again, I would also urge you to think it's not just about video content, but also image content. How can you monetize that indirectly to your partners and drive value in that way, whether that's using results, lineups, or fixtures? Appreciate that was a lot of content to absorb, but I'll just briefly take you through some of the key takeaways. So first of all, it's the importance of developing an audience engagement approach by mapping out the fan journey. It's really, really key. You really must get the initial, the upper funnel part of the engagement funnel right, to be able to drive success across monetization strategies. Again, whether that's in-stream advertising, whether that's branded content. One really important point that around in-stream advertising, the reason why we focus on some of those meaningful metrics that I talked about in the first part around 1 minute video mark, it's because in order to be able to monetize long form content, you need to ensure that you're getting fans and viewers to that 1 minute mark. If the piece of content it's a long form piece of content, 3 minutes long, but you're not able to have that captivating story that doesn't get fans to that 1 minute video mark, you're not going to be able to drive successful monetization. So it's really important to bear that in mind. The quality of the content comes first, that retention comes first, and then the success and monetization comes second. And then finally, it's really around maintaining your authenticity when engaging with fans. This is through branded content. This is a really important key. Be true to yourself. Ultimately, you know what works best for your audiences, and you should be in a position to control that when working on branded content with your partner brands. So that's it for me. I appreciate we've talked, I've talked to you and covered quite a lot of content. So hopefully we do have time for some questions. I believe we might have 5 minutes or so, but yeah, please feel free to ask away.
Thank you, Gabby. That was fantastic. Just a great education on such important platforms to our world. So that was fantastic. I don't believe we have any questions yet, but if we do have them come in, we can perhaps revert back to you. So as it stands, we are now moving over to speak to hear from Katie Williams, apologies, who is Director of Strategic Accounts at Greenfly. And she is going to talk to us about how to work with athletes more. Thank you, Katie, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Give me one moment. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen now. Thanks so much again, Matt, and just to ANOC and Red Torch for putting on this workshop. I know I have been taking notes throughout everybody else's presentations and learning alongside you. So today I am going to speak to the intersection of athletes and social media, which Matt just teed up nicely. But to start off, wanted to introduce myself. As Matt mentioned, I am Katie Williams. I'm the Director of Strategic Accounts at Greenfly. That name may be familiar to some of the folks on the NOCs on this call. But for those who aren't, in a nutshell, very briefly summarized, Greenfly is a content collaboration and distribution platform. And we have the honor, the privilege to work with some of the largest sports organizations across the globe to help them manage those digital media flows, establish those programs that might not previously exist, especially around large events like the Olympics. And so most notably, and applicably for this call, we managed in a partnership with the IOC around their Athlete 365 social program, specifically for Tokyo 2020. And I'm going to speak to that today on the line, but also very excited that this program will be replicated heading into February in Beijing in 2022 and also expanded. Oh, I'm going to go. There we go. But first, before we get into the nitty gritty there, wanted to backtrack. And I think a lot of the points that I touch on here are further emphasizing a lot of the presentations that we've already heard, but wanted to take the background, the 30,000 foot view, if you will, in that athletes and social media interaction. So gone are the days to start in that brands, right? Traditional organizations are the only brands that we're seeing. And that really came about in this ecosystem or landscape shift into social being a priority. This isn't new by any means, but athletes are now themselves their own brands, and they're directly accessible by fans via social. We have continued to see that shift now currently, and so much so that oftentimes these followers that they cultivate prefer following the athlete. Just to touch on, I probably will do this a lot, but the last presentation on the meta side that Gabby gave, fans prefer this authentic storytelling, this one-to-one feel of interaction over the constant kind of marketing or sponsorship. So it's really about, not that that piece is going away, but weaving those two into this voice that an athlete can develop for themselves to oftentimes hold even more weight than a team or organization. That is not to say, once again, that sponsors aren't a key piece of this, but for you all on the NOC side to think through, athletes are most obviously influencers that can speak to, of course, the marketing initiatives that they represent that are key pieces for monetary purposes for them, but they're also representing their sport, their country, their team. So they're constantly navigating all of these different relationships and representations as a holistic part of their brand. And just to further touch on that point in terms of marketability, we actually at Greenfly worked alongside our partner organizations at Sports Pro and Zoom to pull some data here, some numbers in helping to define what encapsulates that brand voice that I was just speaking to on the last slide. So I think we are all, myself included, guilty of kind of heading to a social page or a profile of any type of influencer across any vertical and really focusing on and holding weight to that reach number, the second bullet that you see on the slide. But there's so much more to consider. And again, as we have already heard today, so much more that gets factored into the actual performance and weight that an athlete's voice holds. So we, again, worked with these organizations to produce, you're just seeing a snapshot of the results and data that we pulled here, but a couple of other categories that we looked into to produce these more weighted and dynamic influencer scores were within social media itself, the frequency at which an athlete or influencer is posting, reach, which we already spoke to in terms of their audience and the eyes that they put content in front of, but then also the engagement numbers there. So what are they receiving back in terms of an interaction rate? We talked about untapped audiences, but it's amazing if they're reaching, you know, that follower number that they have within their social profile that is so evident to all of us, but it's even more important that the interaction rate, right? The engagement that they're seeing back is relative to that, and that it's not just reaching those audience members without seeing any engagement. And lastly, here on the audience side, again, reiterating some of the points that we've heard today, but fan demographics are really important. So are they catering, is the influencer or athlete catering to one type of fan demographic, and how is that in turn kind of thinking about your relationship with them? Is that beneficial to you? Is that beneficial to a sponsor or someone who is endorsing the athlete? We heard earlier that the attention spans of Gen Z and millennials are decreasing rapidly. It's just a couple of seconds long. So are they reaching those more difficult demographics, and can you kind of leverage those voices to your benefit rather, if you are not able to tap into them on your side? And lastly, here in terms of audience, we also have fan attractiveness. So quite literally from the sponsor's perspective, what is the monetization of the audience that they draw, that an influencer draws? Do they have purchasing power, and what is their willingness to kind of buy into that? So all of that is great and a perfect tee up, but it's not to say that this goes without challenges that athletes face. So to think about it from their perspective, some of the challenges that building a personal brand and having access to content that exist are that sometimes there isn't any. So an athlete, obviously during their event, speaking to the perspective of an Olympian, they're not participating in a race and taking selfie style content throughout. So they really rely on whoever they can partner with. So be it all of the NOCs on the line here definitely have close relations with their athletes, or at the sport level or at the league or IOC level. They really need to lean on some of those relationships to source that content, which is not so readily available to them. And oftentimes this also is a permissioning issue, right? The content agreements and licensing that exists around it doesn't always exist at the athlete level, maybe down the line when an influencer athlete is fully established, but a lot of that sits at the org level. So these images are protected, and if they were to post it, right, I think we've all seen someone take an image and post it with the Getty Watermark sign and post that live. Same goes for clipping highlights of TV coverage. Those can all be fined if the permission to use the content doesn't exist at the athlete level. And sometimes it's low quality. So they're not getting the type of professional imagery, photography, and videography that can propel their personal brand forward. Lastly here, and you saw on the last slide, a bunch of athletes who established their brand and have become influential in the space, but that is not where things start off, right? Some athletes are not natural in storytelling to begin, and they need some help. And a lot of times that is a trial and error process. So it's up to us all on the line today to help them in that journey. Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing the chat here. Okay, cool. Talking too fast. Sorry, guys. So the IOC came to us with some of these challenges in mind. They recognize that a lot of their athletes experience these issues when it comes to content, and that they had access to content via Getty. So some of the goals that they wanted to accomplish in coming to Greenfly and working with us during the 2020 games in Tokyo was to provide that professional media to their athletes at no charge. So allowing them to leverage this content on social and beyond with no price tag attached, which is huge. Obviously, number 2 here, you see generating general awareness and positive sentiment around the games as an umbrella goal. I think that definitely speaks for itself. And number 3 here, really building that trust through establishing this offering within the social program on the Athlete 365 side. So building kind of a reputation with athletes that they recognize the value in delivering this type of content to them. Obviously, that does, of course, serve that positive sentiment for the IOC in the games, but it is symbiotic, right? So athletes are benefiting from it as well. And lastly here, you will hear me speak to Greenfly and IOC's use of Greenfly a lot in the lens of distribution, especially sharing content, pushing content at scale. But collecting content is also something that we focus on. So it was really powerful for the IOC to effectively run both sides of the program concurrently, especially around some of the broadcast restrictions that we heard about earlier today. Give me 1 second. I opened the chat and it's blocking my screen. Sorry, guys. All right. So just to speak to, as a result of those goals, some of the results that the IOC saw, which were amazing, and to break down in the numbers, which I will, but just to speak to what that distribution model looked like, IOC actually tapped into its agreement with Getty, which was already standing, and something that Greenfly offers is automation of that content from Getty that the IOC already has access to and can grant permission for athletes to use, and auto ingesting or importing that content to Greenfly. And Greenfly is available as a mobile app on the athlete side, so that they can parse through content, easily search content as it pertains to their event, so within the sport, or their wider team. So if they wanted to take some content and congratulate teammates that they're seeing perform successfully at the games, they have the ability to do that as well. So again, really benefiting the athlete side, of course, getting that content to them in a timely fashion, making it, giving them the ability to be reactive in real time, but also on the IOC side, really completely automating that process. So during an incredibly time-consuming and stressful period, they don't have to think through the logistics of that. They know that by way of this integration, all of the content that they have access to is immediately porting to the people that need to receive it. The way that that broke out for Tokyo in terms of numbers, as you can see here, was nearly 140,000 unique assets distributed over to the athletes, 90,000 of which converted to athlete views. So athletes were very much coming into Greenfly and relying on it to consume, swipe through the content. they were also really eager to engage with it in downloading and sharing directly to social lane. So we saw during the games, these numbers have actually increased since, but if we're considering just the period of the games, we had over 1,000 total active users, and this was a limited program at the time in terms of a pilot. So those seats were coveted. And that translated to 373 active users per day during the games, which is quite high if you think about it, just because you're asking a lot of an athlete of an Olympian who is participating in an event of their lifetime, but they also have to manage the expectations of marketing, of course. So that number is quite high, but touching on the point that we heard earlier, we also saw engagement and quite an uptick actually following the game. So in just a few week window, again, these numbers are definitely higher at this point, but following the game, we saw that 373 increase to 619 in the days that followed. So we saw this behavior from athletes in that they were still craving that content, right? We heard about a lot of different ideas during the previous presentations about retroactively looking at what had just happened via the Getty agreement that IOC had. They also had access to historical content. They had access to countdown content. So we're really seeing these windows of pre, during, and post engagement opportunities, and that tracks for the way that athletes were engaging by Greenfly as well. The raw numbers here, just so that you have them, again, amazing performance in terms of metrics, but over 22,000 total downloads and shares throughout the course of the games, and that translates to just over 1,000 per day, which is quite amazing when you think about it from an amplification perspective. Obviously, we have talked about the challenges, and I think this is even reinforcing to some of the previous presentations as well, but what are some of the benefits of athlete social programs? So thinking about this, of course, from the perspective of the athlete, but also the benefits that the IOC saw, and certainly what could be applied to NOCs as well. So culling together different case studies that we have performed across the industry and across verticals that we work with on our customer side. Primarily here, you're going to see an extended reach. So that can be anywhere between a 10 and 30 times uptick in terms of addressable audience. Again, speaking to those engagement numbers and the interaction rate and how important that is. The reach, obviously, in audience is not the only metric we're focusing on here, but you do want that ratio to be as high as possible. Same goes for increased fan engagement. So thinking about the fans, the followers that you attract, how do you see an increase in the folks that you are engaging on the NOC side as well? And the same exact concept applies for sponsor reach, right? So again, they are not gone from this equation, but in thinking about how metrics can convert to monetization, even if an athlete who is on a smaller scale of influence, if you will, this could be a launch point, right? That the social program that's put into place could generate larger partnerships for them. Same goes for those new audiences. So the unearthed kind of smaller endorsements or partnerships that exist out there through messaging within a social program that can in turn produce more funds for the athlete, of course, but also at the NOC level for funds, training, facilities. And then the last piece here, and of course, very, very crucial, is improved relationships with your athletes. So I spoke to earlier this built sense of trust and really establishing that you are a trusted resource to your athletes, and this is a symbiotic relationship, and that is certainly a byproduct of athlete social programs. So you saw how IOC took Greenfly and kind of folded us into that process to define and really decrease what exists amongst many organizations. We hear it all the time as a really manual process, and also identifies the digital media that you already have available to you potentially that can be further amplified and taken and distributed to the advocates, in this case, athletes, Olympians, that you have available to you. So again, really focusing on centralizing those processes, decreasing manual workflows that exist for you, and also helping you kind of push at scale to the influencers that are well established in the space, but also those who need a little help, need a little push in defining themselves, and getting a head start. With a click, you'll be able to do that and distribute to both types of people that you have in your network. And lastly here, just to, again, come back to the piece that I started with, but we are super, super excited that we successfully were able to fold this into the Athlete 365 program and offering for Tokyo. I'm really excited that we can also share that this will be a part of the Beijing program as well. So this is just a tee up for you to start wrapping your heads around the fact that this will be available to athletes directly. The official communication will come from the IOC, so please be on the lookout for more details from their side, but do know that for Beijing, this will be open to each athlete. They will have access to those Getty images that I spoke to earlier on the line, and this is an entirely free benefit to them, so no cost involved. And just thinking through, I think we are hearing about this a bit later in the program, but just thinking through the logistics as it applies to Beijing and China, downloading the mobile app and getting signed up onto Athlete 365 beforehand will likely be beneficial, just to ensure any sort of logistical impacts that being in China physically have. But that is it on my side. I'm happy to pass it back over or open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was fascinating. As currently we don't have any questions for you, but saying that, as soon as I said we had no questions for Gabby from Meta, we suddenly received a number in the chat. So maybe we can take the same approach if you're able to hang around, and perhaps you can answer directly in the chat, if that's okay with you.
Totally fine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, moving on. We are speaking to Michelle Chai from the NOC Malaysia, and she's going to talk to us about working with athletes. And her case study comes from the NOC in Malaysia. So handing over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Matt. Let me just pull my screen up. Cool. Right. So first of all, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or I read it's midnight for some people, wherever you are. My name is Michelle, and I'm delighted to be with all of you, and thank you to ANOC and Red Torch for organizing the social media workshop. So just to give a little bit of a background as to who the NOC of Malaysia is. So we are established in 1953 and located in Kuala Lumpur. We have 14 employees at our headquarters, and our Olympic Games participation is usually about approximately 30 different athletes. So just going back to normal daily media operations. So unlike my colleague earlier from Puerto Rico, we do not have a single employee responsible for media at all. We do not have a person responsible for graphic design as well. So under normal, so there's no media department within the NOC of Malaysia. So this is, let me say, the context that you need to keep in mind when when I try to explain what we are trying to do in Tokyo. So prior to Tokyo, we had 3 social media platform. We had Twitter in 2012, and then Facebook, and then in 2008.
We appear to have lost Michelle briefly. Hopefully her video will unfreeze. I'll send her a message. Michelle, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great, you're back.
Okay.
You froze for a second there, but fantastic to hear.
Sorry. Yeah, so as I was saying, prior to Tokyo, the strategy on our social media site, or rather our media site, was we were more corporate based. So we only posted, let me say, well wishes during holidays. We had condolences postings when somebody passes on, and executive board meeting. We used to post out the press release. So this is a sample of our social media posting prior to Tokyo. So it's similar for all the different platforms that we had. So this part of the reason why we had this strategy was because obviously we do not have a media department, and we do not have anyone responsible for our media team. So this strategy actually worked very well because corporate news, we do not have to do it very often. We are not doing it daily. So it worked really well for us. But of course, then did it work well, or rather, was this what our audience want? Is this what the sports fans in Malaysia wanted? Our media numbers didn't actually show it. So despite us being on social media for, let me say, 8 years or so, and for Instagram over slightly 3 years, our numbers weren't very encouraging. Hence, prior to Tokyo, we started to ask the question about what did Malaysians wanted? What did our sports fans in Malaysia want? So thanks as well to ANOC, who had the first social media workshop. We obviously had the opportunity to listen to NOC Brazil, Guatemala, and we looked at other successful NOCs, for example, USA, Team GB. But of course, we were very well aware that our resources were very, very small compared to most of the other NOCs. Regardless, we said, okay, so let's try for Tokyo, that we wanted a different strategy. We wanted to focus on our athletes. We wanted to work with our athletes, focus on what our fans wanted, and also be the first with news and results and schedule regarding Olympic Games. So for a lot of our fans in Malaysia, they obviously looked at the NOC of Malaysia as the official body that had the to the Olympics. But we were also, let me say, mindful of the challenges, because we have never done this before. In all other previous games, we have never done this, even for our regional games. So we were basically testing out a new strategy in the biggest game, or rather the most high profile games ever. The other challenge that we had was as well is we do not, due to the structure of sports in Malaysia, the NOC Malaysia does not have a direct relationship with our athletes. Our athletes were mostly under the Ministry of Youth and Sports, or the National Sports Council, and their national federation. So we have very limited dealings with our athletes. So that was another of our worry. And of course, we had minimal, we didn't have a media department, we didn't have a media staff, and we didn't have the financial capacity to actually send media people to Tokyo. So for Tokyo, therefore, in order to try to do what we said we were going to do, we looked at this kind of operational structure. So we said in order to provide content, we looked at two of our secretariat people who were already in Tokyo. So we said, okay, you need to double up your job. So in addition to whatever that you're doing, try to, write some stories or content, but we also took the athletes and their coaches and the team managers as part of our content producer. So in terms of photos, we had already 4 photographers from Malaysia who were going anyway. So we said to them, okay, we don't have the financial capacity to, let me say, engage with them fully. So we said, okay, we will subsidize a tiny bit of their costs, but in return, we requested them to provide photos for us. So we had an agreement with these 4 photographers, indicating what kind of photos that we need. And what was important as well was the schedule or the timing in which we wanted the photos to be given to us, because that related back to that we wanted to be the first to post. We had our graphics designer, or rather one of our colleague who is not a graphics designer, but who had some skill in graphic designing, who was very kind enough to also help us with the design in addition to his daily tasks. We had a video editor whom we work with. So in preparation for the games, we started to connect with the athletes from a social media point of view. We collected all their social media information. So we knew which athletes had social media accounts. We took their accounts so that we can use that in the future to tag them in all our posting. With the coaches as well, because we were mindful that in Tokyo, not just the athletes, but we would need the help of the coaches and the team officials to become this content producer on our behalf. So we also maximize our resources, as I spoke about earlier. We took advantage of our photographers who were already in Tokyo. We also double up our staff. They were doing some other tasks, but we asked them to also help in terms of getting content across. And we engaged a media partner who is our video editor in Kuala Lumpur. So the principles that we worked with was, first, the priority is always our athletes. So to showcase the athletes, both from a factual point of view. So factual in terms of when were they competing, the schedule, what were the results, but also we wanted to show the journey of the athletes, which were the emotional side of it. And then the second principle was be the first to publish, particularly with the results, with the schedule, with the photos. So we wanted to be a source, not just for our fans, but for our press who couldn't actually be in Tokyo due to COVID. The other one was because we were very mindful that our social media numbers were very, very small to begin with. So we needed all the help that we could get in order to, publicize our social media platform. So we also spoke to athletes. We tagged the athletes in our posting, and we kind of asked them to repost for us. So it was a little bit free publicity and advertisement for us using the athletes platform, who often than not have a large following. So some examples of us working with the athletes. So we covered the athletes' departure to Tokyo. So as you can see from here, we had tagged all the athletes, and as well as when they arrived back. So I think these were quite important, particularly as it was during COVID. So media and our fans could not be at the airport, either to send them off, or even the family of the athletes could not be there. So this provided the bridge between the athletes and the press, the fans, family and friends. So this was something that we did in terms of working to ensure that the public saw the athletes leaving and arriving back in Kuala Lumpur. We also produce with athletes quote. So again, this was very helpful, not just for the fans, but also for our media. We actually didn't have a lot of written press who was in Tokyo due to all the COVID restriction. So the written press were relying actually, or were using quotes from our posters such as this to actually. So we also produce videos. So particularly with the videos, which were around 4 or 5 minutes each, it was very useful for our press, who then started to quote our social media platform in their written report. So in newspapers, our social media platform started to pop up in newspaper articles, in news bulletin as well. Our reports on our Facebook videos were coming up. So this actually helped us in getting fans who saw or read the reports and saw the videos to refer back to our social media platform. So it actually helped us quite a bit in getting our followings numbers up. One of the things that we did which worked very well for us was the fact that we actually worked with templates. So prior to going to Tokyo, because we knew we had very limited staff available to work on getting news out and getting content out. So we wanted to focus on getting the content rather than during the game spending time trying to design. So we weren't very creative, if you can see. So if you see, all our videos had similar format. So just an example. So they all had similar format going out. Another example is all our result posters. So we decided prior to the games that, okay, this is how, results of the Olympic Games will be put out to the fans. So by having this template, it actually helped us immensely, because despite not having enough staff to handle this, we managed to, for example, in terms of results, we managed to get the results out within a couple of minutes of the match or event finishing. So this actually helped us quite a lot, because we also found that result posters such as this was one of the favorite items being shared by our fans. So it actually helped us quite a lot. The other thing when we looked at working with athletes is we tried to capture the behind the scenes, so the journey of the athletes. So whether it's in this case, the pain, so not just the celebration when they won, but this was a photo that we took with one of our cyclists after he crashed in Kirin. So it showed, it got a lot of interaction with the fans as well. Athletes' arrival at the Olympic Village, the opening ceremony, walk-in behind the scenes, where we had the video as well. So both of these are videos which we posted on our social media platform. And one of the things which actually got huge interaction, so because of COVID, none of the athletes' family and friends could be there with them. So usually, of course, for many of our athletes, the Olympic is the highest point of their career. So under normal circumstances, their parents and their friends would be with them. So we were cognizant of this prior to them leaving for Tokyo. So we thought, okay, if the parents and the friends cannot be with them live in Tokyo, why don't we somehow still connect them online? So prior to Tokyo, we actually contacted the friends and families of the athletes. And of course, it was during COVID, so we ourselves couldn't actually visit the parents or the friends of the athlete. So all we did was we told the parents and the friends what we wanted from them. So they actually recorded the video on their phone, and then they just sent it to us. And I think that's what is also great about technology nowadays. So even though we are not financially very strong compared to other NOCs, but I think the advantage that we took off is the technology that's available around us. So actually all the videos that we posted on Facebook, on Instagram, were all captured by the athletes themselves, or one of our staff actually just stood in front of the athlete and captured it using the normal iPhone or Samsung phone. And then they would send it across to KL for short video editing via the Telegram app. So we didn't need to invest on any new video equipment or microphone, or we whatever that's available to us normally to produce all these videos that you're seeing. So in terms of this, we actually got the friends and family members to record best wishes messages to these athletes, and then they send it to us. We compile it together, and then we showed it to the athlete either prior to their event or after the event, depending on how the scenario is. So at this point, let me just share with you what we did for the video. So I'm going to share the screen with the video.
Jeremiah， 怎样？看到Daddy妈咪高不高兴啊？肯定兴奋啦！等一下，Daddy会跟你讲哦。
Jeremiah， 你人在东京啦，本想飞过去东京现场为你打气加油，但是疫情的关系，所以只能在家的电视前为你加油。你还记得吗？你6岁的时候，吵着要和哥哥姐姐一起练习，当时还说不让你练习就不回家，没想到让你练习练出了成就来，我们都为你感到自豪。你知道这项体操运动并不是简单的运动，但是呢，你还是坚持的熬过来了，终于跳出理想，小时的愿望终于实现了，你终于搭上这个舞台，尽情的去发挥吧，跳出快乐体操，加油！
我们有半年多没有见面了哦，所以幸好也可以通过这个 Olympic Council of Malaysia 这个 video 哦，妈咪告诉你啊，我真的很高兴你能够获得这次奥运会的资格咯，所以让你可以更靠近你的梦想，所以妈咪希望你能够在这个奥运会上发光发热，好好享受吧。我们呢，Lu family and Lee family 呢，还有阿哥阿姐呢，还有哥哥啊，几个 US 啊、意大利啊、加拿大的啊，全部会在电视面前为你加油。
干杯！
最后呢，我们再告诉你一声哦，爱你哦。
اليوم طالع إن شاء.
So yeah. Let me see if I... So if I share back. Yeah, so I think this was actually it worked very well for us in terms of sharing the behind the scenes, and also to show to the fans that, you know, the human side of the athletes. So it worked really well for us in terms of the type of content that we put out. So in summary, I think the numbers speak for itself. Obviously, as I mentioned to ANOC, you know, we started our numbers quite small, and hence I think the growth in terms of percentage was quite huge. But I think we still have quite a long way to go comparing with all the other much more experienced NOCs. And the lesson I think that we took from us in Tokyo is that despite our limited human and financial resources, I think if we focus, and what we mean by focus is in terms of focus the role and responsibility of each of our staff members, as well as to be clear with those who are on board to help us, our athletes, our coaches, our team managers. So because we didn't have dedicated media team, we needed the effort of everyone. And I really do mean that, you know, everyone chipped in, and that's one of the major reasons that we managed to pull this together, despite not having a dedicated person responsible for it. Focus as well in terms of the time and the schedule. So I think earlier my colleagues in NOC Puerto Rico have also mentioned how crucial it is with the scheduling of activities, so what we needed to do at this point so that everything would come together. And then create the use of templates which we created beforehand was also very helpful for us. And the other one is obviously technological days made it possible for us, you know, even without investment into additional broadcast equipment, we managed to produce videos that were good enough to engage with our fans, and also good enough to be a source to our media back home who were not able to travel to Tokyo. So yeah, I think these were the, you know, huge learnings for us, and hopefully we can use Tokyo as a stepping stone for future. Yeah, that's it from, you know, the story that NOC Malaysia would like to share with all of you, and hopefully you guys find it useful with some bits of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was so inspiring, and some great content you shared at the end there. Really emotional stuff. So if you have any questions for Michelle from NOC Malaysia, please do leave in the chat, as well as any thanks and congratulations, which I'm seeing lots in there. Lots of people enjoying these presentations, which is great to see. Right, we now move on to our final section, which is all about Beijing 2022. And speaking next is Guy Horn, who is director of H&A Media. And the topic he'll be talking about is working and using social media in China. And there's no one better equipped to talk to us about this subject than Guy. He's been working in China since 1992. He was one of the pioneers of sports marketing, which included the staging of the first ATP and WTA events, the first FIVB World Grand Prix. And while at ISL Worldwide, he became the project manager for the Chinese Football Association national teams from 1999 to 2002. He lived in Hong Kong for 20 years, speaks Mandarin Chinese, and continues to be deeply engaged with the market, though now based in Lausanne. So a privilege to have you here, Guy. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm just checking how my screen share is looking. How is that, everyone?
Looks great. Thank
Good.
you.
Let me just check the light. Excellent. We finished with Michelle with a lovely Mandarin greeting from the parents there, full of passion. I was a bit surprised how well IT trained they were, honestly. Great audio, good pictures, landscape format, video, scripted. I mean, that was tip top. So that's going to be a hard act to follow for everyone else. The title of this session, Working with and Using Social Media in China, is a little ambiguous. Are we talking about Western social media? Are we talking about Chinese social media? Which one exactly are we referring to? We're going to touch on both. I'm going to kind of walk a path between the two and try and explain to you why this isn't going to be a direct comparison. We're not going to compare, the detail that Gabby from Meta gave about how the mechanics and the economics work, or the experience work. We're going to touch on both sides. And I think my key point is that China is different. Culturally, it's different in every way. And I'm using chopsticks here as an analogy, the basic tool for eating. But chopsticks are a bit more than that, because you need your serving chopsticks from multiple different bowls. You don't just have your own plate in front of you. That's different from Western food. You don't know how much you're going to eat. The portion isn't measured for you. That's different from Western food. You never know quite what flavors are going to be combined by the dishes you've got in front of you. That's different from Western food. Western breakfast is cold, soggy, and heavy. A Chinese breakfast is spiced, lighter, and possibly spicy and hot. Hot noodles, hot buns, all these things these athletes and delegations are going to have in Beijing, you're just going to have a really different experience. And I think it's that mindset when you go into the China market, it's going to be different. You've all got challenges promoting your athletes. This is my challenge. This is Dili and Jialing. They're cross-country skiers. Cross-country isn't really very well known in China at all. These girls have been on the FIS World Tour for the last 2 years. Their English has improved. They mix with other athletes. They're improving a lot, but they've only been on snow really since about 13 years old. So they just don't have that feel, but they're training, they're working hard. And my personal goal is to make the Chinese public appreciate, relate, and emote with these girls, that they are undertaking a beautiful but very, very hard competitive sport. They're up against the Norwegians who've been doing this since they were 3 years old, ditto with the Finns. And that's kind of my small challenge, is to try and make a little mark for a minor niche sport for two athletes who we won't see on the podium, but to make people appreciate what they've done, what they've achieved, and understand the sport a bit better. Where do Chinese consume winter sport news? No different to the rest of us. They take it from television, they take it from live broadcast, social media is mixed in, there's online, there's websites, there's magazines, there's apps. Apps are huge in China. Apps can do everything. You can buy anything on an app. You do not need to walk around with a credit card. You don't need a credit card, actually. There's a digital currency on your app through Alipay or Wechat Pay. I'm pretty sure, as athletes and delegates, you will have digital money when you are in Beijing. The one thing that's interesting about this chart, or two things. One is that winter sports seems to be plus on all of the metrics. Winter sports fans generally, in my amateur research, are well educated. Generally, half of them speak some English, and they're engaging and absorbing all of these elements, both traditional and new digital media. The other thing that's interesting is this research is 2019. It's the latest research I've seen. I haven't found anything else. It tells you a lot about how the world has stopped in the last 2 years. Just as winter sport was supposed to take off in China, this kind of slowed it all down. So let's see what effect the Beijing Games is going to have. How will these youngsters engage with the games? And in theory, how can we inspire them to put on skates or try curling or pick up a hockey stick? I'm going to touch on China's main media platforms. And it was lovely seeing Gabby and the Meta family of brands and a bit of Twitter. We're now on a different universe. We're out of the galaxy. We're into conversations about Weibo, Wechat, Douyin, and Bilibili. Okay, they're the same, but they're not quite the same. Firstly, the numbers. The numbers are off the scale. When it says 1213, that's not in thousands, that's in millions. So we're over 1 billion of monthly WeChat users, and that's not unusual. And we'll go into what each of these platforms does in a moment. In fact, we'll do that next. Good split between genders. So Weibo, a little bit more male biased at 56 to 54. Douyin, more female biased. And Bilibili, again, back into a slightly more male biased. But remember, society is also slightly skewed. There's about 106 men for 100 women. So there's a slight deviation there. If you look at the age groups, I'm going to kind of draw your attention to Douyin, which is TikTok, essentially. It's owned by ByteDance. A very, very young profile. So 21 years old is the rough average. Bilibili also very, very young. So you've got very, very young user groups on 2 of these 4 apps. Weibo is the holy marriage between Twitter and Facebook News, if I can say that without getting bricks thrown at me. It's short format, it's pithy, it's microblogging, it stills video and text. It's limited on numbers of characters, it's around 180 characters, and it's quick, snackable content. Some people do live stream on it, we wouldn't recommend it. Some people put content over 5 minutes, we wouldn't really recommend that either. There's other places for it. It's one of the oldest, but it's been going steady. It hasn't disappeared, it continues to grow, it continues to have a good user base. Douyin is one of the new kids on the block. It's the bamboo curtain split of TikTok. It's very similar, except 15 seconds is the kind of the norm. It's music driven, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of dance. Chinese netizens love producing content. There is no shyness at all. Everyone's up for it. Athletes are up for it, mums and dads are up for it. Go for it. Post your videos, stick it up there, get a fan base. And that's probably why it's had so much growth over the last couple of years. They've started to target sport, and we've started to talk to them about launching some winter sports on the platform. So that one is developing. WeChat's pretty remarkable. You can start to compare it to WhatsApp in terms of its communication facility, its call, its message, its video call, its group call. It is possible that a lot of the NOCs will download the WeChat app, and that's how you will talk to your team members during the games. That will be the easiest way of communicating. Whether you've got VPN access or not, WeChat always works off 4G, there'll be 4G everywhere. So that's kind of one thing in your mind. Super for e-commerce, super for messages, super for e-magazines. If you're doing an e-magazine, which we've got an illustration here of an e-magazine we produce for international skating. We'll be doing that weekly, I would say, during the games with updates on results, features, profiles, that type of thing. Lastly, there's a very good translation function. So if you get onto a WeChat group, hit translate at the top into English. I'm not sure about other languages, but it's good. The AI technology is really good. Bilibili, the last one. This is the wackiest one. This is a combination of the Japanese anime, but also the way you interact is you write messages as bullets, as danmu, and those bullets stream across the video as it's playing, which is slightly unnerving if you're not used to it. Beginning also to move into sport, probably in terms of length of video, closest to YouTube. So we will start to use it for short documentaries and for archive for some of our clients, and we've already got one of those set up at the moment. It's young, it's a very, very young audience. Again, it's that 21 is the median age. So what can you do? Well, we've had nuggets from everyone who's spoken today. It looks like I've copied some of Michelle's script, which I haven't, but I love that position that she's in with the Malaysian NOC, and what I can see is a demonstration in good planning on all of the things that were talked about and presented. We talked also from Katie from Greenfly on the Getty repositioning. Well, I've stressed the point again, you know, you won't get video at all. Possibly you could repost from rights holders in your territory. And I'm thinking more public service broadcaster where, let's say RTM in Malaysia, they followed your athletes. Some of your athletes didn't get on the main TV feed, but they're on the digital, they're in the qualifying. Can you get the clip? Can there be an interview? Can they produce it on their digital channel and then you repost? So that kind of cooperation. Going back to the family members and that lovely video in Mandarin, pre-recorded, yes. Let's get you ready to congratulate your athlete. So let's do that studio link up over social media where we can see your athlete congratulating from home, congratulating the athlete, because nobody's going to be there on site. There's no family on site in Beijing. There will be spectators. There will be domestic spectators. If you are resident in Beijing today, we are told today you are able to buy a ticket, which means there'll be a buzz, there'll be noise, there'll be cheering. So if you have a friend who's living in Beijing who can be outside the stadium and with a ticket and shoot some video or send you a picture, great. That's all fine, you know, subject to not being in people's face too much. But all of that is potential content that's running around. But stick with the family at home and their response and reaction, because that will be a lovely top and tail to what you do. You can still rush out and register a Chinese language social media channel. In theory, if you get Wechat, you've got a minor channel already signed up. Personally, your athletes can post things on moments. It's fine. Do you want to spend too much time on that? Do you want to be policing what they post? You know, those are further questions you want to go into. I'd also raise the question that China's going to take a lot of bandwidth for all of you. If you're not culturally used to the food, the climate, the language, the way of doing things, you're going to be very fatigued. How much do you want to rely on those athletes doing things? I don't know. I would make it very easy for the athletes so they can function on the main goal. One alternative is that your national tourist associations already have Chinese language Weibo accounts. Fine. Can you piggyback on that? Can you share content? So that's another idea. Prepare content beforehand. Please, please, please. Michelle did a brilliant presentation about planning. Planning is the key. Can you do a team greeting? All of you before you set off, you know, 加油 Malaysia, Olympic Day, something like that. Can you do a Chinese New Year greeting? 新年快乐, 北京见, something in Mandarin where you greet, which you can put out on social media. We'll get into in a minute what social media is visible in China and what's not, but doing content in Chinese or attempting to speak Chinese and having some of the athletes learn a few words just for their own sense of understanding is not a bad idea. VPN, will it be available? Will it not? Who knows? There's nothing in the playbook as yet. My guess is that VPN will definitely be available at the venue, will be available in hospitality areas for the athletes, and will be available in the accommodation. So that means using VPN, you can go on all of the Western platforms that you normally use. Without it, they are all blocked. And that I don't say that as a negative. China's been particularly proud of being able to do that. So they will just be inaccessible. You won't be able to get on even the Google search engine, YouTube, Twitter. Absolutely none of that's there. Even maps, you know, navigation, not that you're going to be traveling anywhere apart from A to B straight line. The only Western social media platform that works without VPN is Skype. So have Skype loaded up. Family can talk to athletes on Skype. You can communicate on Skype as well. Apple Music is the only other platform as well, but you're probably going to be a bit more busy than buying music. We talked about Wechat already, and we've talked about all the benefits of it. It's a freebie. You know, what's there not to like? There'll be Wechat Pay where you can load up digital currency on it as well. But again, watch for the playbooks, because maybe there's some other digital money system which is being launched by Ali Cloud. This I don't know about. Pooling resources. The Greenfly idea of using Getty images, what's there not to like? Tip top. Make your life easy in that respect. If you've also got other photographers who are pooling, working for, you know, across a sport or across a region, Southeast Asia, South America, whatever, you know, absolutely super. But you can produce montages with still images. You can add music. You can add your standard graphics. So 5 NOCs get the same photo. You can all change it with your template and with your message and with your music. You can put a different feel to it, etc. So you can still be creative, but yeah, Michelle's point about templates, tip top. Briefly, what we do as a company, which is kind of semi-relevant, we set up at the beginning of April 2018. We immediately worked for winter sports, trying to establish a presence in China. And our first clients were Swiss Ski and with Biathlon. And we followed the Chinese athletes, produced small kits, created a Chinese voiceover, and distributed that to the Chinese media. And up until that time, biathlon didn't exist in China. Alpine skiing didn't exist. Nobody did downhill, nobody did slalom, super G, what's that? Just didn't exist. So these are, you know, we're talking less than 4 years ago that this was pioneered. Today, we've got audiences watching live streaming. We've got social media platform for Swiss Ski where we're running competitions. And we match live broadcast with the social as well. So all of that is blended together. For skating, skating's a very well-established sport in China. China's been winning medals since the World Championships in 1999. They've got a long history of competition. If you look at China's first gold medal in any winter sport, that was Yang Yang in Salt Lake City, where she came home not just with 1, but 2 golds. I was actually there in the stadium, and we went on to manage her sponsorships for the next few years after that. So, you know, really lovely to see her continuity in the sport. She's part of BOCOG, and also the next generation coming up. And we run multiple different social platforms, Weibo being one of them. Bilibili will launch in December. We shoot features and interviews, and we're looking at, you know, probably the biggest audience for any of the single sports, both on television and on social media. So yeah, skating is a hot potato. There's passionate fans, both positive and negative. Every judging decision is scrutinized. Every disqualification, every false start comes with a torrent. We have fans of Yuzuru Hanyu, the Japanese skater. We have an army of fans in China. We're talking 80 to 90,000 likes every time his face pops up. This is a guy with no social media presence himself who, you know, stops traffic when he steps out. So if Yuzuru Hanyu, you know, competes at the games, it's like having Roger Federer and Simone Biles combined together. It's going to be remarkable. That, I think, is a kind of top-line surf across China. We've touched on a few things about Chinese social media. We've touched on a few things about Western social media. There are probably other do's and don'ts about what you can and can't do. You can ask me, but I would also suggest ANOC asks the IOC as well. I'd be very interested to see what they come back with, because you want to give your athletes and your team a fairly smooth path through the game so they can concentrate on sport, which I think probably is what the Olympics is about, so everyone has a positive experience. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Guy. That was brilliant. And I'm sure extremely relevant to everyone here. So that is it. That is the end of our workshop. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to all the speakers. That was fascinating. I have a few wrap-up things to mention. I wanted to well, ANOC would like to remind all of you to use the available tools such as the social media dashboard, which is on ANOC's website. This will soon include TikTok data too. Please make use of the social media handbook, which is also available on the ANOC website, and it's in 3 languages. If a friend missed this workshop or anybody would like to rewatch, it'll be available on ANOC's YouTube channel. That will be available at the very latest next week on Monday. And finally, from me at least, there is a feedback form in the chat. So please do fill it out, because we're very keen to find out how we can improve these sessions for you. So once again, thank you from me, and now to hand back to Andres from ANOC. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thanks all the speakers. We ran a bit over time, but I think it was a very insightful session, which, as Matt mentioned, we encourage you to share with your peers and your colleagues. We also heard from Michelle, it might not only be communication managers that will run your communication and social media, so the more the knowledge is shared, the better for us. And yeah, tune in next time. In 2 weeks' time, I think on the 14th of December, we are having the NOC of Jordan speaking to us about their experience with social media. And they are doing very great on the NOC social media dashboard, being ranked 8th or even 7th in the world for the NOC of having the most social media followers. So a very good lesson there that they can teach us for being a small NOC and being 7th in the world in terms of followers. So take care and see you next time. Thanks, Matt, by the way, and to all our interpreters. Forgot that one. But they are doing a huge and incredible job for us.